Okay, Aurelia abruptly blurted out. She immediately covered her mouth, shocked at what she just said. She accepted Coleman's request, to both of their surprise. The answer just flew out of her mouth. That's fine, ma'am. Sorry to bother. Wait, what? Coleman questioned in disbelief. His pre-made response for inevitable rejection was thrown out the window by the blushing and equally surprised Towery. Are you sure? He hesitantly asked. Aurelia's eyes started darting around the room for the grave she just dug herself in. Her? Teach? She couldn't even perform the simplest of tasks without breaking down in anxiety-fueled panic attacks. Aurelia closed her eyes and let loose the breath she was holding and thought to herself, I already said yes like a total fool. I can't just break my word. Opening her eyes again, she mustered the courage to look Coleman in the eyes and reaffirm her decision. Yes, if you're okay with me, she said with as much conviction as she could muster. Coleman rubbed the back of his head and frowned when he noticed the look of determination on the woman's face. What am I getting myself into? He softly muttered to himself. Looking back towards the queue, he saw his fire team shove as much food as they possibly could fit onto the trays. Spotting Eli, the man had some kind of blue-colored Xeno-steamed bun in his mouth as he gave him a thumbs up. Shaking his head, Coleman turned back to see the Tauri officer still looking at him with a faint confidence. He could tell she was fidgeting and shifting nervously. Inwardly sighing, he accepted his fate as he then offered a warm smile. Would you mind if a few of my friends join us? He asked. Not at all. Yes. That's fine with me. Aurelia tripped all over herself. She inwardly cursed for her embarrassing social missteps, but Aurelia mustered what was left of her pride as an officer and held firm. Huffing in slight amusement, he thought maybe he wouldn't be court-martialed. Maybe he'd just get away with an NJP, non-judicial punishment. I appreciate your generosity, ma'am. I'm Sergeant Richard Coleman of the Terran Army. The soldier then gave a crisp and professional salute. Aurelia noticed she was still sitting during his introduction, and frantically stood to give the human a proper Imperial introduction. Putting her left hand over her heart and right hand over her abdomen, she tilted her head in a 30-degree angle and slightly bowed. I am Second Lieutenant Lyria Aurelia, the first daughter of the Countess of House Aurelia. Coleman kept a straight face again, and he once more screamed internally, Daughter of a fucking Countess! Eli, you son of a bitch! Coleman immediately bowed in an awkward manner. Sorry for the disrespect, my lady. I had no idea, he nervously let out. He knew he was fucking up the curtsy, but he didn't give two rats' ass about the imperial cultural classes. He didn't think he would ever have to deal with a noble. No, I'm not anyone important. Please, raise your head, she tried to assuage him. Coleman looked up from his botched and ill-executed bow. He noticed her melancholic eyes and tired expression. From his understanding from those that interacted with imperial officers, and especially nobles, they were the haughty, confident type. So why was she so different? If you insist, Lady Aurelia, Coleman said, standing up straight. Please, just call me Lyria, she replied. Coleman frowned at her words. It was as if she was diminishing herself. Well, whatever. It wasn't like it was any of his business, or as if he could do anything about it. If you insist, Lyria, Coleman said while sitting down. Lyria sat across from him as he tapped the device on his wrist. Coleman opened his personal communication terminal and shot a message to Eli, informing him he succeeded in securing a seat and a table for the entire team. Coleman's eyebrows twitched as his entire face shifted into a snarl of annoyance when he read Eli's reply. The annoying corporal called him an unlearned peasant and insisted on him using this opportunity to actually learn how to read. Little shit, I'm still your sergeant. I'll have you cleaning the goddamn shitters, he muttered to himself. Shifting uncomfortably across from him, Lyria's anxiety started to spike again as she noticed his displeasure. Did I do something wrong? Are you upset with me? She asked uneasily. Coleman immediately snapped to attention and saw her face almost cringing. No, I'm just frustrated with myself. Coleman flailed his arms in front of his face in near panic. He watched her expression change from pain to confusion as her ears wobbled while tilting her head. He put his hand to his head, trying to think of what to say. He had to redirect this. Coleman was never good at coming up with something on the spot like Eli. He was just some meathead. Eli always got them out of some crazy situation by just spinning the craziest stories or coming up with unorthodox solutions. Putting elbow on the table while still holding his head, He remembered what Eli always told him when it came to manipulation. Why lie when you could use the truth? I've always been terrible at academics, he said with a slight derision, sliding his hand down his face until his head rested on his palm. He looked at Lyria in the eyes. Even during school, I would pay attention initially, but as time went on, my focus would always shift to the window, he said, smiling in self-derision. I would lose myself, attention shifting from the leaves falling to the ground, to the ball flying to the air, Coleman continued. Lyria knitted her eyebrows while she listened to his troubles. The concept of not being able to focus was alien to Altari. Eventually, I would snap back to reality, and everyone was graduating while I was failing, he finished. Lyria had to look away from those deep, blue eyes. She could sympathize with the feeling of failure. She was well acquainted with it. How many had she failed that day? How many lives had been lost due to her ineptitude? How was it that she was spared while the rest of the platoon were slaughtered in front of her? Coleman saw it again. Those eyes. Why? Are you okay? Coleman asked with worry on his face. Snapping out of it, Lyria tried to give him her best smile. Sorry, yes, I'm perfectly fine, she said, trying to expel the intrusive thoughts. Opening up her datapad, she browsed through her literature. So, you can't focus on things. Lyria asked aloud as her fingers swiped across the screen. Since you have a hard time concentrating, why don't we start with something simple? She looked up at the human to study him. Lyria didn't have anything saved to her datapad that was beginner-friendly, but fortunately this base had an ImpNet data center, so it should have something saved to it. Ah, found it! She exclaimed in excitement as she picked out a children's book. I hope you won't be offended, but this is the best I could do on short notice, Lyria sheepishly said, peering up at Coleman while showing him what she found. Coleman was taken by surprise by her abrupt suggestion. He felt like an idiot at the idea of having to read a children's book. But when the teacher was cute, anything was acceptable. That sounds great. How are we going to do this? He responded to her cheerfully. He was surprised as he watched Lyria stand up and walk around the table to sit right next to him. Lyria slotted in right next to him and turned her datapad on its face to enable the hologram projection. Making sure the device wasn't projecting to a presentation size, the device beamed a small half-meter page with writing and drawings on it. Okay, I used this one to help teach my little sister how to read, so I'm fairly confident this should help, she said excitedly. Caught off guard, Coleman's heart started to beat a bit faster as his nerves started to fray. She was close, and smelled good. Fuck, she smelled good! This was bad. Coleman struggled to pay attention to what she was saying. She was both too close and animated, causing her to occasionally bump into him. Okay, so how do you say this? Lyria pointed out a sentence in the book, snapping out of his internal turmoil, and he stared at the odd markings of the Imperial language. Fuck it, let's just go with the flow, he said to himself as he started to read. Lyria seemed to be oddly excited about the makeshift lessons, as Coleman got a few paragraphs in. She would occasionally huff in amusement when he butchered something, or didn't understand a simple word. Coleman didn't want to admit it, since this was on the back of Eli's crazy scheme, but he was having a lot of fun. The two were laughing together as Coleman butchered yet another simple word, when they both jumped out of their skin. Sarge? A feminine voice called out behind him. Oh no, Coleman said aloud. He forgot. Turning around slowly, he could see Kuribayashi and Schmidt standing there, with 2 full trays each. But what he dreaded the most, as he was slowly turning around, was the sight of Eli, with a shit-eating grin stretched fully across his face. Fuck. Ma'am, Sergeant, do you mind if we join you? Eli said in almost a sing-song voice. Or are we disturbing something? He almost hammered home, pointed directly at Coleman. Coleman wanted to scream. He knew the prick was going to use this. Oh, are these the friends you said were going to join us? Lyria asked Coleman with a tilted head. Yeah, Coleman responded almost hesitantly. Coleman proceeded to introduce his fire team one by one to the noble lady. Each of them put down their trays on the table and bowed respectfully to the noble lady. Setting the 2 trays he had with his hand, he bowed gracefully in standard imperial flair, and gave her a winning smile. Good day, my lady. My name is Elijah Adrian Drake. May I have the honor of knowing your divine name? He said smoothly. Surprised by the human's formal introduction, she immediately stood and returned the greeting. Coleman felt a tinge of jealousy as he watched Eli's near-perfect introduction and fluid conversation, where he stumbled around with words in Imperial Common. Imperials always commended Eli's fluency, even though he had a funny accent. His thoughts were immediately interrupted by Kuribayashi sliding a tray of food in front of him. "Here, Sarge, eat up," she said with an unknown piece of meat in her mouth. "It looks kind of weird, but it's actually amazing." She finished swallowing down whatever she was chewing on. Coleman looked down and noticed a smorgasbord of food. It seemed that the trio focused on variety while getting food instead of what they thought looked good. So am I helping all of you?" Lyria asked with an almost daunted look on her face. Coleman and Eli locked eyes for a few moments, before looking at the two other human gluttons shoveling as much food as they could into their mouths. He watched Eli give another one of his mischievous grins. The sergeant opened his mouth to reaffirm that they were here to study, when Eli cut him off. "All three of us are at least passable and Imperial, except this guy." Eli pointed his thumb at Coleman. The complete disregard the two privates had for everything was impressive. It was as if the only thing that existed in this moment was their food. "So, please, continue your lesson. We'll observe," Eli said, walking to the other side of the table. He took a seat next to Kuribayashi and Schmidt, leaving Coleman and Lyria to sit together alone. "Well, shall we continue?" Lyria said next to him. She looked at him expectantly with upturned eyes. Coleman didn't know whether to be thankful towards his team or feel betrayed. He looked down at a similar steam bun Eli was eating in queue and decided to say fuck it. Why not? Coleman took a bite of the steam bun and realized, just like this lesson, it wasn't too bad. Time flew by as Lyria and Coleman continued their lessons to the curiosity of Imperials entering and exiting the building. They didn't realize until the sun hit the cafeteria's ground floor windows, beaming light onto Lyria and her two rowdy group of humans. "Ah!" she exclaimed. Looking at the time, she completely forgot her medical appointment at the military treatment facility. "I apologize. I have to go," she said, turning off the hologram and picking up her datapad. Okay, Coleman said, caught off guard by her abrupt departure. The words he wanted to say were caught in his mouth, so he just watched her pack up in regretful silence. Eli rested his head on his hand and stared at the sergeant with disapproving eyes. "Do you think we could get another lesson from you at some point?" He spoke up, stopping the rushing Tauri. Lyria was about to step away when she turned around at Eli's voice and realized she was about to run off without saying anything. Her ears twitched as she thought. She really did enjoy her afternoon with these humans. Not one intrusive thought throughout the entire event, too. She was excited to tell her psych counselor. "Are you sure you want lessons from me?" she asked, spinning around and locking her eyes onto Coleman. The poor sergeant was caught between Lyria's curious gaze and Eli's dangerous death glare. Yes, please, I would love that," he said, mustering his courage. Lyria's face flushed from embarrassment, but she smiled brightly at the thought of someone wanting her for something. Okay. How about tomorrow at the same time?" she asked cheerfully. Coleman let go of a breath he didn't know he was holding. He half expected to be turned down. "That's good with me. I'll meet you here," he replied. The two stood awkwardly for a moment, shifting around unsure what to do next. Ahem! Eli cleared his throat, trying to get Coleman's attention. Spinning around, he saw Eli was still giving him the stink eye, but this time he was tapping a datapad. Ah, yes. Shit. "Okay, well, I have to get going," Lyria said while rubbing her arms. Lifting a hand towards the other humans, she turned around and started to jog towards the exit of the cafeteria. Coleman hesitated. He felt the words on his very lips, but they refused to come out as he watched Lyria bound away. Why was he like this? Looking back towards the table, he saw Eli. The man was borderline furious and started waving his arm in a shooing motion. "What the fuck are you doing? Stop being a bitch! Go!" Eli snarled at his sergeant, pointing at the door. This fucking bastard, Coleman thought to himself. Shit, fuck, ass! Fine! He yelled as he got up and jogged to catch up with her. Lyria just stepped through the door. She was in a hurry to get to the MTF, Medical Treatment Facility. She was late. Very, very late. Wait, Lyria! Coleman yelled, catching up to her at the door. Lyria spun around, surprised to see the human she was just teaching running up to her, the sun hitting his hair in a way that seemed to make it glow.
Yes? Did I forget something?
She asked curiously. The human seemed hesitant while scratching his head. He finally inhaled deeply, pulling out his datapad, and exhaled. Would it be okay if we swapped contact information? He asked with uncertainty. I thought it would be nice if we could talk to each other more. Coleman started to scratch his head to ease his frayed nerves. Lyria's eyes were wide and her pupils were dilated, as if she were a deer in headlights. It was rare for a man to initiate an interaction in Tari society, and it was almost unheard of for them to go out of their way to take the initiative, even if it was for professional reasons. Human males were smaller than Tari males, so Lyria and Coleman came up to the same height. But in this very moment, this human male seemed massive to her, just like the human that saved the rest of her former platoon.
What?
She stuttered, while utterly panicking. Her eyes began to swim as she tried to make sense of what was happening. It's fine if you don't want to, Coleman said in a hurry. He didn't want her to feel pressured into accepting, but when it came to these things, being direct and honest was the best policy. I just had a good time, and I'd like to talk to you more, he finished off with a goofy smile. Lyria's mouth flapped, trying to find the right words.
You...
She tried to get something out of her mouth. Coleman stood there patiently, accepting whatever happened next.
Okay,
she managed to eke out. Lyria's brain immediately turned off as she gingerly pushed her datapad toward him. Walking through the doors to the MTF, Lyria's mind was going full blast. Her brain hadn't been blasted with this much endorphin since she graduated the academy with full honors. There was an almost spring to her step as she walked through the halls, but her smile and cheer evaporated when she turned the corner. There she saw someone who was revolted by her. Corporal Elitaria Tempestria. She was sitting on the floor outside of an occupied room, her hands hugged around her knees and her head firmly buried between them. And unfortunately, she caught her attention as she was walking by. Elitaria slowly lifted her head from her knees to look up at who was passing by, and her expression contorted from exhausted confusion to rage and disgust. Lyria immediately looked down to avoid eye contact, picking up the pace to push the next corner she needed to make.
I'm sorry,
she whispered. It felt like an eternity as she felt the glare pierce her back until she turned left. Lyria immediately took off in a dead run until she managed to get to her destination. She put her hand against the wall, hyperventilating. It felt like she couldn't breathe and the world was closing in around her. Those awful, intrusive thoughts were crawling back, echoing in the back of her head. She took another minute focusing on breathing techniques she was taught. 1 large deep breath. Count to 3. Exhale. Control. She needed to control herself. When she finally was satisfied with her mental state, she reached out and grabbed the door handle of the room she was to enter. Curiously, the vibrations of a notification came from her datapad. She received a message. A small smile spread across her face as she read the contents. Rich, I had a lot of fun today. I hope you have an amazing night. Smiley face. Lyria.
I enjoyed myself too. I hope to see you tomorrow.
She put her datapad away and opened the door.
You seem surprisingly happy,
a voice called out from behind a desk.